Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Chapter 15, The Forbidden Forest. Things could not have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study on the first floor, where they sat and waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild cover-up stories chased each other around Harry's brain, each more feeble than the last. He could not see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were concerned. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the cloak? There was no reason on earth Professor McGonagall would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around. Let alone being up in the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds except for classes. Add Norbert and the invisibility cloak, and they might as well be packing up their bags already. Harry had thought that things could not have been worse. He was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst out, the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you, to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying he was going to catch you. He said he had a Harry shook his head violently, to shut Neville up, but Professor McGonagall had seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert, as she towered over the three of them. "I would never have believed any of you. Mr. Filch says you were up in the astronomy tower. It's only 1 o'clock in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her slippers, as still as a statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's been going on," said Professor McGonagall. "It doesn't take a genius to work out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock and bull story about a dragon trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom heard the story and believed it too." Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor, blundering Neville. Harry knew what it must have cost him to try to find them in the dark, to warn them. "I'm disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. "4 students out of bed in one night. I've never heard of such a thing before. You, Miss Granger, I thought you had more sense. As for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All 3 of you will receive detentions. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the right to walk around school at night, especially these days. It's very dangerous. And 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50? Harry gasped. They would lose the lead. The lead he'd won last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through the long pointed nose. "Professor, please, you can't." "Don't tell me what I can and can't do, Potter. Now get back to bed, all of you. I have never been more ashamed for Gryffindor and her students." 150 points lost. That put Gryffindor in last place. And one night they ruined any chance of Gryffindor for the House Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. How could they ever make up for this? Harry did not sleep at all that night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillow for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of anything to say to comfort him. He knew Neville, like himself, was dreading the dawn. What would happen to the rest of Gryffindor if they found out what they had done? At first, Gryffindor's passing the giant hourglass that recorded house points the next day thought there had been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter, the hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had less than all those points. Him and a couple other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people at school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuffs turned on him, because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose in the House Cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed and didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter. We owe you one." Only Ron stood up for him. They all forgot about this in a few weeks. Fred and George had lost loads of points all in the time they've been there, and people still like them. "They'd never lost 150 points in one go, though, have they?" said Harry miserably. "Well, no," Ron admitted. It was a bit late to repair the damage, but Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. He'd had it with sneaking around and spying. He felt so ashamed of himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. Resign? Wood thundered. What good will that do? How are we going to get any points if we can't win at Quidditch? But Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team would not speak to Harry during practice, and if they had to speak about him, they'd call him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have as bad as a time as Harry because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down and working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the revision he had to do to keep his mind off of the misery. He, Ron, and Hermione kept to themselves, working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complicated potions, learn charms and spells by heart, memorize the dates of magical discoveries and goblin rebellions. Then, about a week before the exams were due, Harry's new resolutions to not interfere in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unexpected test. Walking past from the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whispering from a classroom ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. No, not again, please. It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. Next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight. Harry didn't think Quirrell had ever noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared, then peered into the classroom. It was empty, but a door stood ajar on the other end. Harry was halfway towards it before he remembered what he'd promised to himself about not meddling. All at the same time, he had handled 12 Sorcerer's Stones that Snape had just left the room. And from what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking in with the new spring in his step. Quirrell seemed to have given in at last. Harry went back to the library where Hermione was testing Ron on astronomy. Harry told them what he had heard. Snape's done it then, said Ron. If Quirrell told him how to break the anti-dark force spell. They're still fluffy, though, said Hermione. Maybe Snape figured out how to get past him without asking Hagrid, said Ron, looking up at the thousands of books at the library surrounding them. I bet there's a book somewhere in here telling you how to get past a giant three-headed dog. So what do we do, Harry? The light of adventure was kindling in Ron's eyes again, but Hermione answered before Harry could. Go to Dumbledore. That's what we should have done ages ago. If we are trying anything ourselves, we'll be thrown out for sure. But we've got no proof, said Harry. Quirrell's too scared to back us up. Snape's only got to say he doesn't know about the troll that got in on Halloween and that he was nowhere near the third floor. Who do you think they'll believe, him or us? That's not exactly a secret. We hate him. Dumbledore will think we made it up to get him sacked. Filch won't help us if his life depended on it. He's too friendly with Snape, and the more students that get thrown out, the better, he'll think. And don't forget, we're not supposed to know anything about the stone or Fluffy. That'll take a lot of explaining. Hermione looked convinced, but Ron didn't. If we just do a bit more poking around. No, said Harry flatly. We've done enough poking around. He pulled the map of Jupiter towards him and started to learn the name of its moons. The following morning, notes were delivered to Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville at the breakfast table. They were all the same. Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock tonight. Meet Mr. Filch in the entrance hall. Professor M. McGonagall. Harry had forgotten they still had detentions to do over the points they'd lost. He'd half expected Hermione to complain that this was a whole night of revision lost, but she didn't say a word. Like Harry, she felt they deserved what they'd got. At 11 o'clock that night, they said goodbye to Ron in the common room and went down the entrance hall with Neville. Filch was already there, and so was Malfoy. Harry had also forgotten that Malfoy had gotten a detention too. Follow me, said Filch, lighting a lamp and leading them down outside. I bet you'll think twice about breaking a school rule again, won't you, eh? He continued, leering at them. Oh yes, hard work and pain are the best teachers if you ask me. It's just a pity they let the old punishments die out. hang you by the wrist from the ceiling for a few days. I've got the chains still in my office. Keep 'em well and oiled in case they're ever needed. Right, off we go, and don't think of running off now. It'll be worse for you if they do." They marched off across the dark grounds. Neville kept sniffing. Harry wondered what their punishments was going to be. It was most likely going to be something really horrible, or Filch wouldn't be sounding so delighted. The moon was bright, but clouds scuttling across it kept it throwing them into darkness. Ahead, Harry could see the lightened windows of Hagrid's hut. They then heard a distant sound.
"Is that you, Filch? Hurry up. I want to get started."
Harry's heart rose. If they were going to be working with Hagrid, it wouldn't be so bad. His relief must have shown in his face, because Filch said, "I suppose you think you'll be enjoying yourselves with that oaf. Well, think again, boy. It's in the forest you're going, and I'm much taken if you've come out all in one piece." At this, Neville let out a little moan, and Malfoy stopped dead in his tracks. "The forest," he repeated. He didn't sound as quiet and cool as usual. "We can't go in there at night. There's all sorts of things. Werewolves, I've heard." Neville clutched the sleeve of Harry's robe and made a choking noise. "That's your lookout, isn't it?" said Filch, his voice cracking with glee. "Should have thought them of werewolves before you got in trouble, shouldn't have you?" Hagrid came striding towards them out of the dark, Fang at his heel. He was carrying his large crossbows, and a quiver of arrows hung over his shoulder.
"About time," he said. "I've been waiting for half an hour already. All right, Harry, Hermione."
"I shouldn't be too friendly with them, Hagrid," said Filch coldly. "They're here to be punished, after all."
"Is that why you're late, is it?"
said Hagrid, frowning at Filch.
"Been lecturing them, eh? It's not your place to do that. You've done your bit. I'll take from here."
"I'll be back at dawn," said Filch. "For what's left of them," he added nastily, as he turned and started back towards the castle, his lamp bobbling away in the darkness. Malfoy now turned to Hagrid. "I'm not going in that forest," he said, and Harry pleased to hear the note of panic in his voice.
"You are if you stay at Hogwarts,"
said Hagrid fiercely.
"You've done wrong, and now you've got to pay for it."
"But this is servant stuff. It's not for the students to do. I thought I'd be writing lines or something. If my father knew I'd be doing this, he'd—"
"Tell you how it is at Hogwarts," Hagrid growled. "Writing lines? What's good to that to anyone? I'll do you something useful if you get out. If you think your father'd rather have you expelled, then get back to the castle and Go on."
Malfoy didn't move. He looked at Hagrid furiously, but dropped his gaze.
"Right then," said Hagrid. "Now listen carefully, because it's dangerous. What we're going to do tonight, and I don't know no one taking risks. Follow me over here for a moment."
He led them into a very edge of the forest. Holding his lamp high, he pointed down at a narrow, winding earth track that disappeared into the black trees. A light breeze lifted the airs as they looked into the forest.
"Look there," said Hagrid. "See that stuff that's shining on the ground? Silvery stuff? That's unicorn blood. There's a unicorn in here that's been hurt badly by something. This is the second time of week I found a dead one last Wednesday. We're going to try to find the poor thing. We might have to put it out of its misery."
"And if whatever hurt the unicorn finds us first," said Malfoy, unable to keep the fear out of his voice.
"There's nothing that lives in this forest that'll hurt you if you're with me or Fang," said Hagrid. "And keep to the path. Right now, we're going to split up into 2 parties and follow the trail in different directions. There's blood all over the place. It must have been staggering around a bit, since last night at least."
"I want Fang," said Malfoy, looking at Fang's long teeth.
"All right, but I warn you, he's a coward,"
said Hagrid.
"So me, Harry, and Hermione will go off on one way. Draco, Neville, Fang, go the other. Now, if anyone wants to find the unicorn, we'll send up green sparks, right? Get your wands out and practice now. That's it. And if anyone gets into trouble, spend up red sparks. We'll come to find you. So be careful. Let's go."
The forest was black and silent. A little way into it, they had reached a fork in the earth in the path, and Harry, Hermione, and Hagrid took the left path, while Malfoy, Neville, and Fang took the right. They walked in silence, their eyes on the ground. Every now and then, a ray of moonlight through the branches above lit a spot of silver-blue blood in the fallen leaves. Harry saw that Hagrid looked very worried. Could a werewolf be carrying unicorns? Harry asked.
Not fast enough, said Hagrid. It's not easy to catch a unicorn. They're powerful, magic creatures. I never knew one to be hurt before.
They walked past a mossy tree stump. Harry could hear running water. There must be a stream somewhere close by. There were still spouts of unicorn blood here and there while winding the path.
You all right, Hermione?
Hagrid whispered.
Don't worry, it can't have gotten far. If it's badly hurt, and we'll be able to get behind that tree.
Hagrid seized Harry and Hermione and hoisted them off the path behind a towering oak. He pulled out an arrow and fitted it into his crossbow, raising it ready to fire. The three of them listened. Something was slithering over dead leaves nearby. It sounded like a cloak trailing along the ground. Hagrid was squinting up in the dark path, but after a few seconds the sound faded away.
I knew it, he murmured. There's something in there that shouldn't be.
A werewolf? Harry suggested.
That was no werewolf. It was no unicorn either,
said Hagrid grimly.
Right, follow me, but be careful now.
They walked more slowly, ears straining for the faintest sound. Suddenly, in a clearing ahead, something definitely moved.
Who's there?
Hagrid called.
Show yourself. I'm armed.
And into the clearing came, was it a man or a horse? To the waist a man with red hair and a beard, but below that was a horse's gleaming, chestnut body with a long reddish chair. Harry and Hermione's jaws dropped.
Oh, it's you, Ronan,
said Hagrid, half in relief.
How are you?
He walked in forward and shook the centaur's hand. Good evening to you, Hagrid, said Ronan. He had a deep, sorrowful voice. Were you going to shoot me?
Can't be too careful, Ronan, said Hagrid, patting his crossbow. There's something bad in this forest. This is Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. By the way, students end up at school. And this is Ronan, you two. He's a centaur.
We noticed, said Hermione faintly. Good evening, said Ronan. Students, are you? And do you have much to learn up at school? A bit, said Hermione timidly. A bit? Well, that's something, Ronan sighed. He flung back his head and stared into the sky. Mars is bright tonight.
Yeah,
said Hagrid, glancing up too.
Listen, I'm glad we've run into you, Ronan, because there's a unicorn been hurt. You seem to know anything?
Ronan did not answer immediately. He stared unblinkingly upwards, then sighed again. Always the innocent that are the first victims, he said. So it has been for ages past, and so it is now.
Yeah, said Hagrid, but have you seen anything, Ronan? Anything unusual?
Mars is bright tonight, repeated Ronan, while Hagrid watched him impatiently. Unusually bright.
Yeah, I was meaning anything unusual, a bit nearer to home, said Hagrid. So you haven't noticed anything strange?
Yet again, Ronan took a while to answer. At last he said, The forest hides many secrets. A movement in the trees behind Ronan made Hagrid raise his bow again, but it was only a second centaur, black-haired, bodied and wilder looking than Ronan.
Hello, Bane, said Hagrid. All right?
Good evening, Hagrid. I hope you are well.
Well enough. Look, I've just been asking Ronan. You seen anything odd here lately? Only there's a unicorn been injured. Would you know anything about it?
Bane walked over to stand next to Ronan. He looked skywards. Mars is bright tonight, he said simply.
We've heard,
said Hagrid grumpily.
Well, if either of you do see anything, let me know, won't you? We'll be off then.
Harry and Hermione followed him out of the clearing, staring over his shoulders at Ronan and Bane until the trees blocked their view.
Never, said Hagrid irritably. Try and get a straight answer out of a centaur. Race stargazers, not interested in anything closer to the moon.
Are there many of them in here? Asked Hermione.
Oh, a fair few. Keep to themselves, mostly. But they're good enough about turning up if I ever want a word. They're deep-minded centaurs. They know things. Just don't let on too much.
Do you think that was the centaur we heard earlier? Said Harry.
Did that sound like hooves to you? Nah. If you ask me, that's what's been killing the unicorns. Never heard anything like it before.
They walked on through the dense, dark trees. Harry kept looking nervously over his shoulder. He had the nasty feeling that they were being watched. He was very glad that Hagrid had his crossbow with them. They had just passed a bend in the path when Hermione grabbed Hagrid's arm. "Hagrid, look! Red sparks! The others are in trouble."
"You two wait here," Hagrid shouted. "Stay on the path. I'll come back for you."
They heard him crashing away towards the undergrowth and stood looking at each other very scared, until they couldn't hear anything but the rustling of leaves around them. "You think they've been hurt? Do you?" whispered Hermione. "I don't care if Malfoy has, but if something's got Neville, it's our fault he's here in the first place." The minutes dragged by. Their ears seemed sharper than usual. Harry seemed to be picking up every sigh of the wind, cracking the twig. What was going on? Where were the others? At last, a great crunching noise announced Hagrid's return. Malfoy, Neville, and Fang were with them. Hagrid was fuming. Malfoy, it seemed, had sneaked up behind Neville and grabbed him for a joke. Neville panicked and had sent up the sparks.
"We'll be lucky to catch anything now, with the racket you two are making. Right, we're changing groups. Neville, you stay with me and Hermione. Harry, you go with Fang. And this idiot. I'm sorry."
Hagrid added a whisper to Harry.
"But I'll have a harder time fighting you, and we've got to get this done."
So Harry set off into the heart of the forest with Malfoy and Fang. They walked for nearly a half an hour, deeper and deeper into the forest, until the path became almost impossible to follow, because the trees were so thick. Harry thought the blood seemed to be getting thicker. There were splashes on the roots of a tree, as though the poor creature had been thrashing around in pain close by. Harry could see a clearing ahead, through the tangled branches of an ancient oak. "Look," he murmured, holding out his arm to stop Malfoy. Something bright white was gleaming on the ground. They inched closer. It was a unicorn, all right, and it was dead. Harry had never seen anything so beautiful and sad. Its long, slender legs were stuck out at odd angles where it had fallen, and its mane was spread pearly white on the dark leaves. Harry had taken one step towards it when a slithering sound made him freeze where he stood. A bush on the edge of the clearing quivered. Then, out of the shadows, a hooded figure came crawling across the ground like some stalking beast. Harry, Malfoy, and Fang stood transfixed. The cloaked figure reached the unicorn. It lowered its head over the wound in the animal's side and began to drink its blood. "Ah!" Malfoy let out a terrible scream and bolted. So did Fang. The hooded figure raised its head and looked right at Harry. Unicorn blood was dripping down its front. It got to its feet and came swiftly towards him. He couldn't move for fear. Then a pain pierced his head like he had never felt before. It was as though his scar was on fire. Half blinded, he staggered backwards. He heard hooves behind him, galloping, and something jumped clean over him, charging the figure. The pain in Harry's head was so bad he fell to his knees. It took a minute or two to pass. When he looked up, the figure had gone. A centaur was standing over him, not Ronan or Bane. This one looked younger. He had white, blonde hair and a palmetto body. "Are you all right?" said the centaur, pulling Harry to his feet. "Yes, thank you. What was that?" The centaur didn't answer. He had astonishingly blue eyes, like pale sapphires. He looked carefully at Harry, his eyes lingering on the scar which stood out, livid, on Harry's forehead. "You are that Potter boy," he said. "You had better get back off to Hagrid. The forest is not safe at this time, especially for you. Can you ride? It would be quicker this way." "My name is Franz," he said, as he lowered himself to the front leg so that Harry could chamber onto his back. There was a sudden sound of more galloping from the other side of the clearing. Ronan and Bane came bursting through the trees, their flanks heavy and sweaty. "Franz," Bane thundered, "what are you doing? You have a human on your back. Have you no shame? Are you a common mule?" "Do you realize who this is?" said Franz. "This is the Potter boy. The quicker he leaves the forest, the better." "What have you been telling him?" growled Bane. "Remember, Franz, we are sworn not to set ourselves against the heavens. We have not read what is to come in the movements of the planets." Ronan pawed the ground nervously. "I'm sure Franz thought he was acting for the best," he said in his gloomy voice. Bane kicked back his legs in anger. "For the best? What is that to do with us? Centaurs are concerned with what has been foretold It is not our business to run around like donkeys after stray humans in our forest. Franz suddenly reared onto his hind legs in anger, so that Harry had to grab his shoulders to stay on. Do you not see that unicorn, Franz? Bellowed Bane. Do you not understand why it was killed? Or have the planets not let you in on that secret? I set myself against what is lurking in this forest, Bane. Yes, with humans alongside me, if I must. And Franz whisked around, with Harry clutching on as best he could. They plunged off into the trees, leaving Ronan and Bane behind them. Harry did not have a clue what was going on. Why was Bane so angry, he asked. What was that thing you saved me from, anyway? Franz slowed to a walk, warned Harry to keep his head bowed in case of low-hanging branches, but did not answer Harry's question. They made their way through the trees in silence, for that so long Harry thought Franz did not want to talk to him anymore. They were passing through a particularly dense patch of trees, however, when Franz suddenly stopped. Harry Potter, do you know what unicorn blood is used for? No, said Harry, startled by the odd question. We've only used the horn and tail hair and potions. That's because it is a monstrous thing to slay a unicorn, said Franz. Only one who has nothing to lose and everything to gain would commit such a crime. The blood of a unicorn will keep you alive, even if you are an inch from death, but at a terrible price. You have slain something so pure and defenseless to save yourself that it will have but a half-life, a cursed life, from the moment the blood touches your lips. Harry stared at the back of Franz's head, which dapped silver in the moonlight. But who'd be that desperate, he wondered aloud. If you're going to be cursed forever, death's better, isn't it? It is, Franz agreed, unless all you need to do is stay alive long enough to drink something else, something that will bring you back to full strength and power, something that will mean you will never die. Mr. Potter, do you know what is hidden in the school at this very moment? The Sorcerer's Stone, of course, the elixir of life. But I don't understand who... Can you think of no one who has waited many years to return to power? Who has clung to life, awaiting their chance? It was as though an iron fist had clenched suddenly around Harry's heart. Over the rustling of trees, he seemed to hear once more that Hagrid had told him on the night he had met.
Some say he died. Coddleswap, in my opinion. Don't know if he had enough human in him left to die.
Do you mean Harry croaked? That was Harry, are you all right? Hermione was running towards them down the path, Hagrid puffing along them. I'm fine, Harry said, hardly knowing what he was saying. The unicorn's dead, Hagrid. It's in that clearing back there. This is where I leave you, Franz murmured as Hagrid hurried off over to examine the unicorn. You are safe now. Harry slid off his back. Good luck, Harry Potter, said Franz. The planets have been read wrongly before, now, even by centaurs. I hope this is one of those times. He turned and clantered back into the depths of the forest, leaving Harry shivering behind him. Ron had fallen asleep in the dark common room, waiting for them to return. He shouted something about Quidditch vows when Harry roughly shook him awake in a matter of seconds, though he was wide-eyed as Harry began to tell him what had happened in the Forbidden Forest. Harry couldn't sit down. He paced up and down in front of the fire. He was still shaping. Snape wants the stone for Voldemort? And Voldemort's waiting in the forest? And all this time we thought Snape just wanted to get rich. Stop saying the name, Ron said in a terrified whisper, as if he thought Voldemort could hear them. Harry wasn't listening. Franz saved me, but he shouldn't have done. Bane was furious. He was talking about interfering with the planets. They must show what Voldemort's coming back. Bane thinks Franz should have let Voldemort kill me. I suppose it's written in the stars as well. Will you stop saying his name? Ron hissed. So all I've got to do now is wait for Snape to steal the stone, Harry went on feverishly. Then Voldemort will be able to come and finish me off. Well, I suppose Bane will be happy. Hermione looked very frightened, but still she had a word of comfort. Harry, everyone says Dumbledore is the only one you know who has ever been afraid of. With Dumbledore around, you know who won't touch you. Any who says centaurs are right. It sounds very much like fortune-telling to me, and Professor McGonagall says that's very imprecise branch of magic. The sky had turned light before they had stopped talking. They went to bed exhausted, their throats sore, but that night's surprises weren't over. When Harry pulled back his sheets, he found the invisibility cloak padded neatly underneath him. There was just one note pinned to it. Just in case.